Thank you all for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. This is Beth Ponder with Train PD. I'm going to be your host today. So welcome to Workforce Integration Initiative, or WII, and reporting follow-up activities with our presenter, Mahalia Baldini. I'm your host today and joined by Krista Mosher and Deborah Hargrove from our team that are helping with technical support today. Welcome to Mahalia Baldini, our interim AEL State Director.
Hello everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. Which are going to take up about an hour of your time here, and hopefully it'll be well worth it. I am going to share my screen, hopefully. Okay, so we're going to do two things today. I really want to go over just some general items related to your WII grant, give you some information about that. And then at the end of the webinar today, I'd like to transition a little bit and go over some Teams enhancements that we made that are related to follow-up activities. We've added some features in there that's going to allow you guys to utilize Teams in terms of reporting some of these follow-up activities that you're doing. So I'm going to turn my camera off just to save a little bit of bandwidth here. And let's go ahead and get started. And actually, before we do, I know we had a lot of people that were scheduled and registered today. I'm assuming that we may have some that aren't able to join us, and I just want to say our thoughts, our prayers, our love is going out to those of you in the coastal regions that are dealing with inclement weather and all the weather events out there. So we are with you. In terms of WII, just a little background here on this actual grant. This was something that was originally approved by the TWC Commission in December of 2019. And its original intent was to increase integration with referrals to local workforce development boards, our VR partners, and general enrollments into post-secondary and also employment. That was sort of its general purpose. And also a part of that was the follow-up that would take place in terms of hiring staff or creating processes for following up, particularly on students who have exited the program, either through an opportunity to re-engage them or to find out exactly, what's going on now that they've exited. Have they reached their goals, basically? Now, in April of 2020, after the pandemic hit, we went back to the commission and we said, we have an opportunity here to sort of modify and expand the scope for these funds. So what we did is we requested an increase to distance learning and remote learning activities that could be provided with these funds. And so it was very timely, I think. It was just, a stroke of unluck or luck, however you look at it, that we were able to take a formally approved initiative and then actually kind of tweak it and expand it so that you guys could have a wider range of services that you could provide with this money. So the money is out there. You guys have had it since, I think, about April or May, and you have been drawing down. Some of you have been drawing down on that. So I wanted to give and kind of talk about what we can use some of this funding for. So we have a letter that's going to be coming out very soon, and I apologize it's actually taken this long for it to come out. It was ready to go, and then we had to pull it back, obviously, and make some tweaks just based off of the commission action to expand the services, and then it kind of has to go all the way back through this process. So I apologize, but it is coming. So look for it whenever it's coming out. It's going to be 0420. And it's going to talk about and detail out many of the things we're going to be talking about today. And you'll get a lot more detail in the letter than what we're even going to be able to touch on today. So let's talk about some of the funding and sort of what this funding can be used for locally. And we've seen it thus far being used for all of these reasons. So you all have very specific things that you need, and you're utilizing these funds for those things. It may include distance learning, such as buying laptops, computers, tablets. As you are ramping up and creating frameworks for a remote learning or virtual learning environment, these are, purchases that many of you have seen happening in a greater regard in the last several months. We've also, in the allowability for the funding, we've increased or we have allowed and created options for licensing, distance learning, both for distance learning and also remote education. So outside of the approved distance learning list, we've also expanded to include remote education services like mobile messaging apps or different types of software that you may need in order to conduct a virtual classroom space. So that is in there, and that is an opportunity for these funds. And then we have the original intent for the funds as well, which is more workforce integration. We're talking about sort of case management type work, reaching out to students, engaging with students, looking at the goals the students came into the program for originally, and then connecting students to those services in order to meet those goals. So if they come in, they say, hey, I want a better paying job, I want to get my high school equivalency. Those are goals that they come in for. And you can utilize these funds in order to connect students to those types of activities. Specifically, data collection for entered employment or entry into post-secondary. So this is really in regards to calling students up. You've noticed that they've exited. You're calling them up and you're saying, hey, what's going on? While you're doing the engagement activities, you can also take that opportunity to say, hey, are you working? Hey, I see here that you really wanted to go and enroll in, post-secondary education. Did you ever do that? Those are the types of questions, that can be happening during those follow-up activities. If they aren't and they haven't met their goals, of course, re-engagement's always, the first thing. We want to get them back in so that we can re-engage them in services if the need is still there, but also just referrals to our partners. Well, if you're really looking for a job and that has to be your number one priority and you don't feel like you can do school and work, then let me give you a referral and let me, hook you up with our Workforce Solutions partners, get you registered with Work in Texas, and what have you. So those are some of the follow-up activities that I know a lot of you are doing. Now, last, I just want to mention the monthly report. We've been talking about this on our bi-weekly calls with you guys, but I want to bring it up again and just kind of say why we're doing things this way. And likely you will see this on other non-competitive grants that we put out. This WII grant, we call that like a non-competitive grant because we're putting funds out to current grantees in order to expand or supplement services. So you have two things here, two things at least that I want to talk about. One is the finance side. So in CEDAR on your WII grant, we have created some supplemental categories. And our expectation is that we want you to break down those WII expenditures in CEDAR based off of these supplemental categories. And I'll talk a little bit here in a minute about why we want you to do that. And then the other thing is we have a deliverable that is through SurveyMonkey, and it's due the 24th of each month. So you guys have just submitted that for July's data. Thank you very much for those of you that did that. We do have some folks that we're still missing. So right now, if I just said that and you thought to yourself, I didn't do that for my WII grant, now is the time. Go back and do that before either Kara or your program specialist kind of reach out and poke you a little bit. So you have an opportunity to go ahead and fill that out for us. These are all very important for a variety of reasons. And I'll talk a little more about what those reasons are. But going back to the initial kind of reason for this WI grant and the reason why the funding was put out there, again, to support students in completion of text chains, collecting information on employment and earnings, collecting information on post-secondary education, and also credential attainment. Now, here in a little bit, I'm going to walk through some of the performance that has to do with these types of activities. Just because I think it's a good kind of starting point that's going to hopefully codify all the way around the reasons why we put the funds out there and sort of the expectation for the follow-up activities. And then the teams piece, which is, of course, once you've gathered that information and you're collecting that information, what do you really do with it? The reporting side of these grants, especially any non-competitive grant that we put out like this, is very important. And the reason why we put these activities into CEDAR was really to make sure that we can tell the story. We want to go back, the commission approves these funds, and we want to be able to go back and kind of paint that picture to say how these funds are being used across its different purposes and being able to break that down for the commission, and also just to report actual dollar amounts in each of those categories. Hey, we put out $2 million, we spent $150,000 on equipment, laptops, tablets, whatever. We put $2 million out and our grantees spent, $1 million on staff. Those are the types of things we like to be able to go back and really, I think, make a statement about how the funds are used. It kind of tells the full story. And it also just gives that flexibility to kind of say, especially on this one, because it's a little weird, guys, because we put it out originally, in December with a very specific purpose, and then we kind of expanded it, and it doesn't always kind of mesh together as well as we'd want, and it was really more about the timing. So for this one in particular, I think we would definitely want to be able to go back to our commissioners and say, this is how this money is really getting spent and being applied. Now, you will do that in CEDAR with your breakout categories and your supplemental cost categories in CEDAR, but then you have this SurveyMonkey that's due on the 24th of every month, and that is going to be all the qualitative information that we find so useful here at the state level. And the qualitative information really has to do more with you being able to be a little more descriptive about those funds. So even though you're reporting them by a cost category in CEDAR, the SurveyMonkey is really your opportunity to say, hey, we were able to hire 2 staff that are going to be doing X, Y, and Z. Or we were able to develop a laptop loaner program that, students who, didn't have a laptop or a computer at home can now continue to participate in our services because we created this laptop loaner program. So those are always really good, and significant feedback from you guys that we get through the SurveyMonkey. So I know they're a little, not everybody likes the survey, and we try to keep them as short as we can, but I want you guys to know that we look at them, we share them, we create PowerPoints on them, and we share those with leadership. So don't feel like you're just doing it and we're not listening and we're not reading them, because we are. So I'm going to stop there before we transition and see if there's any questions thus far. I will be referencing another document, and you guys, before we transition to the next sort of thing that I want to spend probably the bulk of time on, because I figured it is what we'll get the most questions on, which are really all the teams updates. I will say this. I think about 2 months ago, I sent out something called a Teams release for all the updates that have occurred in Teams, including this employment outcomes page, which is what I'm going to be going over today. Look for those, guys. They are chocked full of information. And I will be referencing that today because there is a great little handy chart in there that is a crosswalk for some of the drop downs that we're going to be talking about and reviewing in Teams today. So if you're out there, you can probably go search your email and look for that. That got sent out, I want to say back in June. prior to this release. It could have been July, but it would have went out in a TWC transmittal. So I will say that. So I want to talk a little bit about the updates that have occurred in Teams. So I'm going to go through a couple of things, give some folks some reminders about performance in the area of exit-based measures, which is kind of coincides with why we are kind of putting this money out there in order to do follow-up activities. Typically and historically in AEL, it was kind of like the core focus, of course, is on the student when they're with us, what they're learning, what type of academic progress, that we are creating. Well, under WIOA, we now have all this responsibility and performance that largely happens after they exit, which is more about what is the outcome and the impact of the services that we provide to students when they're with us, and what is sort of that impact. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the performance just as a reminder of sort of why we're doing all of this, and why we've created these enhancements and why we're putting money out there, just to sort of, see if there are any questions out there before we go into the live Teams training environment. I will also say at this time, last month, I think it was last month, oh, you guys, y'all have to forgive me. There's been so much y'all can only, y'all can imagine, I'm sure, because I know you are very busy as well. I sent something out and basically created a Teams training user ID and password, one for each grant recipient. And this is for you guys to really log in there. You'll see how I do it today. It'll give you kind of a little taste of that in order to build out a training environment so that you guys can go in there and safely test things on your own in the training system. The training system has all the updates that the regular team system has. So anything that happens in the training environment typically is exactly how it would appear in the regular environment. So with that in mind, I want to kind of talk about a few things. Primarily today, when I'm in the training environment, we are going to be focusing on employment outcomes details page. I want to go over all of the requirements that exist in there and make sure everybody's comfortable with what we're asking you to put into the system, what we're actually asking you to collect to put into the system. Now, I will say for the purposes of Teams and this employment outcomes page in Teams, I want to be very clear about what the real priorities are for entering this in Teams versus maybe not entering it in Teams. Okay, so what students need employment outcomes in Teams? Like which ones? Like how does everybody need one? Who is it? And the truth is that all exiters are in the denominator for employment-based measures, every single one of them. There's nothing other than an exclusionary reason that you have applied in Teams. There's nothing else that's going to take them out of that denominator. So with that in mind, that's a lot of students. You guys know locally how many students sort of exit the program. And even if they exit, which means they're gone for 90 days and then they come back. Just because they came back into services does not negate the fact that they are in a denominator for employment-based services for that first period of participation. So that's been a kind of I think a myth out there that they thought, well, what if they exited the program, and I'm going to show you how you know who's an exiter and who isn't. But if they exit the program, you're on the hook for these employment-based measures, regardless of if they, 100 days after that exit, they decide to come back to the program. We're still going to track everything about that student moving, after that exit date. So that's something to just kind of important to keep in mind. The other thing is I want to talk about prioritization, because you will have a lot of exiters, no doubt. Hopefully you don't. Our goal is to always retain students, but things happen. So the priority is always going to be individuals who lack an SSN. Well, why is that? We will still data match against UI records automatically for any participant that has reported an SSN. So if they have given you an SSN during the intake and they have provided that to you, we are going to take that SSN and we are going to match it automatically against our UIH wage records. What that means is that you can prioritize your follow-up activities for performance purposes to those who lack Social Security numbers. That's one priority group, because what we know is if they don't have a social, the only other way that we are going to get any of this employment-based information is from you. And that's from you telling us in Teams. That's the only other way we're going to get it. The second one here are those who have an SSN, but maybe they're working like a 1099 job, or they're self-employed, or they are doing some form of employment that is not going to be reported in a UIH wage system, which means they're not working for an employer that is reporting tax wages. So that will hopefully just kind of help you to prioritize when you're building this out and you're hiring staff and you're trying to figure out exactly what those staff should be doing and who they should be focusing on, because it's a lot of people and it's not a lot of money. So, we have to be careful, and we are very aware of that here at the state level. The other thing I want to talk about is I want to do a little crosswalk before we get into the live training system so that you can pay attention to this document. So again, the Teams Release Notes 5.1 includes an index at the bottom. And in that index is going to have fields, the drop-down options, and give you some good descriptions of what we're really talking about whenever, of these options in the drop-down. So for instance, in this appendix, in the Teams Release 5.1, what you can see is there's a field and a wage source, and then there's a drop-down. And in that drop-down is pay stub, W-2, IRS 1099. There's actually a couple more further down the page. That is going to correlate to Teams on the employment outcome details page in this box that you can see here. So when it says wage data source, these are going to be the options in that drop down: pay stub, W-2, IRS 1099, employer verified. There's a couple of others. So that's sort of the crosswalk that you can utilize whenever you're training local staff on how to enter what they are collecting accurately. Any questions out there before I'm kind of shuffle along here?
I don't see anything in the chat right now.
Don't be shy, folks. Ask me.
Here comes one. If a participant is self-employed, what document should we attempt to collect?
So if a participant is self-employed, you can ask them for a 1099, assuming that they're reporting their taxable wages like they're doing an IRS or reporting IRS. There's also an option in here that is other. That is going to be for people that are really working under the table and maybe they're just getting receipts while they're out there. They don't have an official, 1099 or an IRS tax statement or anything like that. You can just do receipt-based. And that is why, as you see here, there's this little text box to the side that says wage data source description. And that is where, so on the wage data source, you'd select other, and then on the description, you would say invoices. Hopefully those are things that are happening. Now, what we can't do is someone saying they're self-employed, and then you say, well, how much did you earn last quarter? And they say $5,000, and that's verified. Now you can do that with a verified employer that has like an FEIN or something like that. You can do like a verbal confirmation, but if it's a self-employed person, you need some sort of documentation. Now, most self-employed individuals, they have, if it's legit, they're doing QuickBooks, they're doing invoices, they're getting something for their work. And you can still report that in Teams. Good question.
I know we have one more. What if a student does not want to provide documents?
If they don't want to provide the actual documentation, that's fine. You just won't be able to enter that information into Teams. Now, here's the thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and that is, a lot of times people just don't know, or they don't want to provide it, or maybe they'll say, I'm working with so-and-so over off of 23rd Street. You can call the employer and do an employment verification. Anybody in the state of Texas can call my employer, TWC, and do an employment verification for me. There are also some services out there, and I didn't include them in the PowerPoint today because I wanted to do a little bit more resource, but talk to your local workforce board, contractors and providers. They have resources out there that they use. There's things out there called the work number. There's some other things that you guys could potentially get access to as a contractor or vendor that you use to try to get this information for your students. But you can always call an employer as long as you have like an employer name and, a rough start date. Anybody can request that. Any other questions out there?
No, ma'am. We just got one person with a little bit of audio trouble. It says that you're cutting out, but you seem fine for me.
Okay. Well, keep us posted if anybody else can't hear me.
Okay.
One thing I will say that, guys, this is new for AEL. This isn't something that's new on the workforce side of the house, especially for working with individuals that are in some sort of, state mandated program. It's all about documentation and collecting documentation and things like that. This is a new sort of space for AEL in many ways. So if there's something specifically that we can do in terms of professional development that we can build for you, just on the follow-up activities and how do you ask these questions, or what are some of the resources out there like the work number that we can utilize that's going to help us in these areas. Don't feel, reach out to your program specialist or me and kind of say, we're having a really hard time. We're putting this money out there so that hopefully, you guys are building this out, but you're going to come across challenges and we want to know what they are. That's going to help us work with TCAL. That's going to help us to, better develop technical assistance, that's going to be very specific to meet your needs. One thing I will say about the wage source documentation and sort of why it's important and how it helps, if you really think about IET students, for instance, and you're going to see this when we go through the demonstration in the training environment, way at the bottom of this picture that you're looking at, you're going to see something that says training related. It's the last field at the very bottom. In particular, for IET students, this is a very important field. And this is going to tell us for our IET students that if you're tracking employment, did they get a job that is related to the training that they actually took and were credentialed in and completed? So there are some different options, and I am going to try here in just a minute to show you what I mean by some of that. So how does all of this really help performance? So you have two employed or enrolled measures. These are all exit-based measures, both of these. And I say employed, it can also be enrollment. You now have the capability with this employment outcome in teams that you can report either one. The enrolled in educational activities has been in educational outcomes forever. And you've had that capability for a really long time. The employment is the new one. So this is a very kind of crisp, but here are the two employment or enrolled outcomes that we're going to be looking at today and what I'm going to be walking you through. So employed or enrolled Q2 after exit. So this is a snapshot in time. We look at all the dates within the second quarter after the exit date, and we review them for wages that have been reported, again, through a UI match if they have an SSN, or we view the employment outcomes in teams. So it's a snapshot in time. And I'm going to walk you through, an example of this. The other one is the educational enrollment that is in teams. And this has to be reported by you. We don't have any match process with the coordinating board or anybody else that's going to tell us if a student exits our program and then goes and enrolls in post-secondary education. That all comes from you guys. So if you don't tell us those things are happening, you will not get credit for those things happening. So that one is a quarter 2 after exit. The next one is we call it quarter 4. It's really quarters 3 and 4. And this is a retention measure. So this is really more about, are the people that we reported as being employed or enrolled in that second quarter still employed or enrolled in the third and fourth quarter? So it's going to look at wages that have been reported, same, and it's going to look at educational enrollment. It's just the denominator shrinks significantly, okay? Because it's not everybody that exited, it's everybody who exited and showed either wages or post-secondary enrollment in that second quarter. And then we take those folks, and then we run them through third and fourth quarter to see if they retained employment or if they are still in post-secondary education. So I know that's a lot. And it's probably one of the most difficult things to understand. I mean, I have to go back all the time and really look through this stuff and say, am I really making sure that I'm interpreting this correctly? And this is how it works. Now, I have provided a little bit of a crosswalk in the PowerPoint just to kind of help. This is what I use, guys. When I have to sit and use my brain really hard and think about this stuff, I have to have something. I have to have a cheat sheet where I'm really looking at what is the exit date and then trying to map that thing out for that one student so that I can come up with examples for you guys. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that this is based off of calendar year, which is why if you've been paying attention to the performance reports that you get from us that are credential-based or employment-based, what you'll notice is that they run on a calendar year, not a program year. So what you're looking at right now is based off of a calendar year, okay? And I'm going to run you through an example, in Teams just to kind of, make sure everybody's kind of understanding what I'm saying here. And I think it'll bring up a lot of good questions. So if you have an individual that exits in the first quarter, anytime in the first quarter, then we're going to be looking for wages or post-secondary enrollment in the second quarter, which will be technically the third quarter of the calendar year, right? Which is going to be any time between July and September. So we will look between July and September. Now, a lot of people say, well, what if they exited in January? You got to remember that when it comes to exits, it's always by quarters and not by months. So even if they technically exited in January, they are going into that quarter's reporting period, which doesn't end until March. So all the other exiters in January, February, and March kind of all go into this cohort bucket, and then the second quarter is applied. So I know that's a little confusing. So these are sort of the dates of how this works. So if you're looking for the second quarter for all the individuals in January, February, March that exited, you're really going to be looking to see if they had wages or entry into post-secondary July through September of that same year. Third and fourth quarter, to look at that retention measure of all the people that ended up as a yes, they do have employment, or yes, they are enrolled in post-secondary, then go in and we will pass them through the same process to see if they are still employed or enrolled in the third and fourth quarters, which would be any time between October and all the way through March. So kind of think about that and keep this up. Were you able to put it in the chat pod, the PowerPoint?
We did manage to get it into the chat pod, so the PowerPoint copy of the PowerPoint is there for you to download. We do have a couple of comments and questions if you want to pause.
Sure.
All right, we have a A couple of comments about training. Andrea said she'd like to see training on suggestions for collecting this data from students without SSN. And Katerina followed up, for all students, really, it's challenging collecting this information after exit. Some best practices in the field would be definitely helpful. So I made a note of that. And then we have a couple of questions about the training environment logins. Risa asked, did Mahalia say the training environment logins have already gone out?
Yes, and let me explain who they went out to. So these went out to the grantee point of contact. So it would be normally whoever your director is for your grant recipient. If you're in a consortium, it went to the director of the consortium and whoever's listed there on the contract. Now, what I will say, for those of you that are in a role and you want access to the training environment, the process for getting access it's much easier because you probably already have access to the production environment. Go to your director, say, hey, I really want to learn more about this. I want to be able to create an account and get into the training environment. As long as your director is good with it, we're good with it. This is a training environment, that's the point. And I want to build as much capacity out there for you guys at the local level. I want everybody to know this stuff. And I want everybody to get really comfortable with the way the system works, because it's going to continue to evolve, and we are going to continue to have new enhancements and new features in the system that are going to make it much more of like a case management type system. We're going to add some counselor notes. We're going to add in some things that are going to, I think, really help you guys locally not have to use multiple systems, hopefully. You may still have to, because if you're in a college and you're doing Banner or something like that, but we're trying to make it more user-friendly for those of you that may not have those secondary systems as options, and you really have to use this. So counselor notes or, new reports, all of these things. So if you want access, I don't have a problem with it. Go through your director and have them request access for you, and then we will work to get you set up.
Okay, and I think that addresses Katerina's question about where did the who got the logins. And then Alex had a question. So we are touching base with them each quarter, is that correct? Yes, and I'll kind of go through an example of that here with my example that I'm going to do. But technically, yes, that's the best way to do it. Until you reach a full 4 quarters after the person has exited, that's the best case scenario that you can do for them. And again, prioritizing individuals that don't have SSNs, and that goes along with, or individuals, maybe they have an SSN, but they're not working and they're only in post-secondary. I didn't include that one on my PowerPoint, but that's a good point. And the reason for that is because, again, there's no matching. There's only matching on wages and employment. There's no matching on post-secondary. So, do you want a few more, or do you want me to hold these?
Let's
okay. So Andrea, do we need to be collecting education employment outcomes for current students without SSNs, or only existing students? Oh, excuse me, only exiting students.
Really good point. So all the employment and the credential outcomes are exit based. So they really don't kick in, and the person doesn't fall into a denominator of sorts or count against you in terms of performance until they exit. Now, however, you can start, this conversation with students, and I would actually recommend it because at that point if you do it while they're still working with you, they're used to somebody kind of reaching out to them, and you're developing the trust for the information. Like, hey, this is a federally funded program, and these are the things that they want to know. And we don't send participant level data to the feds. They've never requested it, and we don't send it. It's all aggregate information, but it's important information. We want to keep the funding alive. We have to be able to share this information, with our federal partners to show, what we're doing with these funds. but it builds the rapport with the student while you're still working with them. So you're not like a cold call collector, right? After they've exited the program, and you're like calling them up and being like, hey, remember me from, 5 months ago? That's probably not a really good practice. So building that rapport while they're still engaged with you is, I think going to be really vital.
Okay, just a couple more. We have a couple of comments about they really like the chart that you created showing where the exit measures fall. Let's see, and let's go down to Tara. Does Teams allow entering this data after June 30th, after data is locked for the previous year?
Yes.
Okay, and then the last two comments, the pandemic will affect these outcomes since many students may have lost jobs. I hope this would be taken into consideration in the future. And then someone agreed with that statement.
Yeah, and I agree with that statement too. Of course, as soon as the pandemic happened, and Octave was actually, more responsive than normal, I will say. And then, they put out a lot of great FAQs and a lot of great guidance. They have not at this point given us any reprieve from performance measures at the federal level. Of course, we're having conversations at the state level. And really our role, guys, is I want you to have the information and to also know and understand that we get it. We are getting it from all sides, as you can imagine. So we know what the impact may possibly look like out there in terms of performance. So I don't want you guys to feel, like we're, like there's this enormous amount of pressure. This is really more about building that, because eventually the pandemic will end. I know it feels like it won't, but it will. And I want everybody to kind of start to work on these strategies and building this thing out so that you have this in place when things do get better. Because right now it's probably a little more manageable. You got less students that you're working with in many ways. But when we do get back to full blown, there's nothing, they haven't indicated anything that's going to say that the actual performance measures have changed. So we're still going to be looking at these exit-based measures, and we're still going to be responsible for them. So this is really about just giving you information.
Okay, that's everything for now, and we're at the 15-minute mark.
Woo, okay. So, okay, I just want to run you through it. I'll just do kind of one test example. So I have pulled up a participant in Teams. This is AEL Test 4. I don't know who named him, but that's just terrible. But one thing I wanted to show you, and a way that you can do this, and someone earlier said, well, should we be focusing, on exiters? How do we know when people exit? So if you pull the POP report, of course, the POP report will tell you when someone has actually exited the program. It'll also tell you like a countdown to exit. So when a person is on a countdown to exit, let's just say they've been out of class and they haven't had any contact hours for 30 days or, 60 days. Well, you want to do your re-engagement at that point before they're an exiter. Let me just say that. But you can pull the POP report if you're really trying to focus on just this particular performance measure. And when that exiter flag says yes, then the clock is ticking. And from that exit period, which on this particular person, their last date of service was 1/31/2020, that's their exit date. So I know that I have 4 quarters after that first exit quarter that I can, basically get and kind of on the hook for doing follow-up activities and being able to enter this information or gather this information. Now, this particular person, no social, right? So they would be in a prioritization, group because they've provided us with no social security. I also would maybe go to their profile, their last year's profile. And what I would see here under employment is that they were not employed at the time. Now, sometimes you can go into the profile and it'll say, hey, they were employed when they first entered our program and at program entry. That's promising because maybe they're still employed. And you guys can, if you want to, and this is one thing I had brought up before, if they come in and at the point of intake, they say, yeah, I'm employed, you can ask them, you know, like, oh, who are you employed with? How many hours a week do you work? Oh, can I get a contact name? You can do that at intake if you want to. For the purposes of today, just so we can kind of get through the enhancements, this is kind of where you can find that and where you can physically go into Teams to include this information. Now, what you'll notice about this student is, and let me get to, you guys don't have all those grant recipients, but I do. So you can kind of see the person was in class, they fell off, they ended up exiting here 1/31/2020. So now I know that we're kind of on the hook. You have a new page here called Employment Outcomes. I'm going to click there. When I get there, there's going to be this option to add employment outcomes. When you select that, you're going to get a page or a form field. This is what you're going to use to, if you have done follow-up and you have gathered information from the student, where you're going to enter that information. So you're going to say whatever the quarter is that you applied. Since this person exited in Q1, I'm going to go straight for Q2 of that same year. It's going to say earnings type. Now, this is what we were talking about earlier, whether it's self-employment, contract employment, Texas UI covered employment, non-UI covered employment, federal employment, and then out-of-state employment. Most of the ones that you're going to see are going to exist right here, top three: self-employed, contract, or Texas UI covered. Again, in the Teams 5.1 release, we define what this really means in terms of earning types. There's two I want to share with you today. One is the Texas UI covered employment. This one's super easy. Now, remember, guys, this is probably the one you're going to use the least. And the reason why I say that is, again, because if they have an SSN, we're going to be able to track it. Now, if they didn't provide you with an SSN, but when they tell you who they're working for and you know that's probably an employer that pays UI, we've given you the option to do an employer search in the UI system, okay? So I'm going to do an employer search, and I'm just going to type in whatever, employer they provided, and it's going to bring up all the employers, with that name. And it'll tell you, some of them like, I think Amazon, all of the big ones that have multiple warehouses or multiple HR addresses will all come up. You can select it. When you do that, it's going to auto-populate many of these fields, which is great. It just helps you. One that it does not auto-populate is the ONET, and that has to do with what is the position in which they are doing. What is the occupation that they are doing? So I'm going to pretend that this individual is a secretary at the Texas Workforce Commission. The training related button, again, these are your options for training related. And very quickly here, I want to bring this up because at the very bottom of this Teams 5.1 document, you can have the definitions for these, okay, in terms of training related. Job trained for means specifically, let's just say a person's in an IET, they trained to be a CNA and they got a job as, an LVN. That means that they have attended a training, or let's use LVN because that's the example in here. They attended a training or did an IET for an LVN and they obtained employment as an LVN. That means that that job was literally trained for, and that is the position that they got in terms of employment. They have another one, which is training related. This could be someone who maybe actually attended training for like an LVN, but they got employment as a CNA. It's still kind of within the same occupational bucket. So that would be training related. These other two at the end, not training related, and this is going to be for people, think of a person in like an IET that attended a training for an LVN, but when you went and got their employment information, they're a delivery driver or something outside of that industry occupational field. So that means that it's not training related. So this actual drop down is more about the occupation that you have found for this individual. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And then no training involved, that's simple. There's just no training involved. It's not an IET person. You never supplied them with any training. So for this individual, I'm just going to say no training involved. It's always going to give you this reminder, and it's just saying like, hey, for best results, try to obtain the social security number. So this is what it'll look like when it's kind of all said and done. At the end, it's going to show you who entered this. Everybody will be able to see if there was another grantee outside of you that entered this information, you're going to know. Okay. Hey, there's somebody else tracking this person. Maybe I should call them up and see what they're doing. So that is one option. Now I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you very quickly here. We only have 6 minutes. I'm keeping tabs on it, Beth. So I'm going to choose a different option, and I'm going to say that this person was on a non-UI covered employment. When I select anything other than this Texas UI covered employment, I'm going to have to fill out all of this information. So that gives you an idea, and when you're providing follow-up, what information you're going to have to be requesting from either the employer or from the student to follow up with the employer. So one of them is the quarterly earnings. This is probably honestly going to be the toughest one for you guys to get because nobody wants to tell anybody how much money they're making, including me. So this one is always tough, but it is required. It's the whole point of, we actually have a measure that you guys probably know very little about because we do not make it a contracted measure with you. But as a state, we do have a measure with the feds based off of median earnings. So they take all of our students and we have to tell them what the median earnings are for our students. Again, not a contracted measure for you, but we have to collect it because we do have a measure as a state. So we would type in, whatever these quarterly earnings, that means all the money they earned in the quarter. We have to select a wage data source. I'm going to say employer verified. And for the Texas non-UI covered employment, there are some very small businesses that are not required to pay unemployment insurance on their employees because they're a very small business. That would be a person that would, exist here for non-UI covered employment. So wage data source, I'm saying employer verified. If I were to choose other, that's when this becomes applicable over here. And you have to type something in. You can't leave it blank if you select other. Employer verified, the start date, you're going to have to correlate this start date to whatever the quarter is that you have applied this for. So this individual, again, exited January. So we are going to be looking at wages from April all the way through June, right? I'm going to type in some numbers here. You'll notice, red asterisk, that means you got to put something in there. This one doesn't have a red asterisk, but I can tell you it is. It's actually a fix I've got put in there right now because it should be. You have to either enter an employee or a phone number or an email address. The NAICS, most of you are familiar with this, but this is more about industry. So this would be a department store. So if I start just typing in a name, it's going to pull a list up from the NAICS, and it's going to give you some options there that you can then select. ONET is specific to occupation. What is the occupation or the job function that they're doing at this department store? And no training involved. I'm going to save this. And I missed state. How could I do that? But I did. I don't even know why it doesn't just do. Hey, somebody should do that. Now look here, this says the start date cannot be greater than the end of the quarter plus the year, okay? So you see how it defaulted to April 2020, but look what I'm putting in to say that I'm reporting. So this should be, so whenever I save that, this is what it's gonna look like. And so every quarter you would, again, somebody asked that question like, should we be checking up on this every quarter? And I'm saying every quarter, starting in the second quarter, third, fourth quarter, after a person exits, Once you get that first one, it's a little easier to go to an employer and re-verify that. This is also one reason why we ask for the release of information. If you guys feel like, hey, we want our folks to be able to call an employer up and verify employment, you have to ensure that your participants sign off on that. And if the employer says, well, do you have permission? Have they given you permission to request this level of information? You can supply that to the employer, and they can provide it to you. Any questions out there? We only have like 2 minutes here, so I want to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, Mahalia, there are several questions. So
Okay.
what I've been doing is just copying them into a Word document, and I can pass
perfect.
them on to you. Does that sound okay? And maybe we can address them in the biweekly call.
Yeah, sure, we can do that. And I'll stay on the line for a few minutes here if anybody wants to stick around, and I'll, answer some questions. For those of you that have to go, I just want to say thank you for joining me today. Hopefully it's been informative, and have a great weekend.
And we'll go ahead and leave the room and the chat open for a few minutes. So if you have a question that didn't get addressed, please go ahead and stick it in the chat and we will collect everything.
Yes, hi, I have a question, and I don't know, should I write it on the chat or can I just ask you?
I think you can just ask me.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question. So if I have a student that's coming in already employed, do I have to fill out that detailed employment section, or do I have to track them?
Well, here's the thing. If they come in employed, that's telling you where they are at program entry, which is always good. But no, you don't have to fill it out. If they come in employed and, the performance measure is all based off of exit.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily something that you have to update the whole time that they're working with us and that they are, getting services. This is really about, well, what happens after they leave us?
Right. So if this student that comes in is employed and exits the program and is still employed with the same company and everything, do I still have to go in there and fill that out, or will you automatically
Yes.
track them through your system?
No, you would have to fill it out. Again, assuming like if they didn't have an SSN or they didn't want to provide you with an SSN, if they come in and they say, hey, I'm working, and this is always something good too, just a recommendation, from me in particular. I mean, you guys are required to ask for an SSN, but if they say that they're working, and they didn't supply an SSN, it's worth a shot to go back and say, hey, I see here, you said that you were working. Can I get your SSN so that we can, just do our wage match information? That way I don't have to, bug you if you exit. That's just a good kind of best practice. But yeah, you're on the right thinking there, that even if they come in and they're employed and their employment has not changed, in particular, if they don't provide you with an SSN, you would have to track their employment in Q2 and then Q3 and 4 after they exit.
So if they do provide me with a social security, and I guess that's my question. If they do have a social, they're employed, and then they exit and they're still employed, do I have to track them again? Or does it automatically track because of the social?
We will automatically take all the individuals that we have in teams that have a social, and then when they exit, and we will run it against the UI system. What you may not know, depending on how long the person is, employed, is, or how long the person is in the program, is, are they still employed when they exit? Because they can be in there for like a year. Who knows?
Right. Okay.
That's the hard part, is trying to kind of figure out, what is going to help you guys, and what do you have bandwidth, locally and capacity locally. And that's why I was kind of saying, if it was me, I would prioritize everyone that doesn't have a social, because right off the bat, we can't match.
Okay.
They already have a social, and you can confirm that they are still with the same employer they were with when they entered the program. don't worry about it. On to the next one, right? Because I know that you guys have limited capacity locally to do this. So I don't know if that helps you, but
Yes. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
That was a really great question, and I'm glad I stayed to hear the answer, because
yeah,
the priority for those individuals who don't have an SSN. However, that sort of becomes a point if it's something that they're totally in, like they entered into college, and that then we do need to follow up with them whether we have their social or not. So are there other areas where, regardless of the fact that they have a social, that we would have to be on guard for collecting information?
Yeah. And that's why, like, when the POP report, I love the POP report because it kind of gives you the countdown, like, when a student's becoming disengaged. So it's kind of a big red countdown for you guys to say, this student's becoming disengaged and they're going to exit, which means they're going to fall into all of these exit-based, denominators for performance. So that is the best time, as early as possible, to reach out to the student and try to figure out intent. Because if the intent is, oh yeah, I'm going to come back, or, oh, hey, I have a medical issue, and you can do plan gap, or you can do anything that's going to re-engage that student, both in the team system and obviously back into services, that's job one. But if you're following up at that point and the student's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, my bad, I got into college and I'm just going to focus, on that, and I'm doing this program over here at Amarillo College. Well, then that's the opportunity, to track that student and enter that information into Teams so that we have that. Or, hey, I got this really great job, and then I can't do job and school, so I've got this really great job. Oh yeah, tell me about it, and then you want to put that in the system so that you can continue to track those, that employment with that individual. It's very tricky. It's not easy. I just want to give you guys as much information as I can about how the performance works and sort of what the expectations are. And also just the importance of getting the social if they have one. You've got to have someone in that intake role that's really comfortable talking to individuals, that can really say, look, we don't report your socials to the feds, because guess what? We don't. It's not a lie. We don't do that. All the data that they get is complete aggregate data. There's no names, there's no socials, there's no nothing. So that's just really kind of, you need someone that's in that role that's going to make the student feel comfortable that, these are federal dollars and, we're just trying to be good stewards. Getting the social at the beginning is going to make everybody's life much easier.
Maria put one in the chat. What about an ESL student without an SSN and who isn't working?
Yeah. And the situation there is, they count against you unless, you can report that they are self-employed. It's kind of a tricky situation because a lot of people, even though they may not be legally able to work or have work registration documentation to provide, they are earning money and wages. Likely they're not going to want to tell you about that. So those are the folks that typically they're just going to count against you, unfortunately.
Well, you've left some wiggle room there in our measures, because that's an expectation in the number that we're given, that there's some drop off. There's some, we're not at 100% yet.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This was extremely informative, and the PowerPoint is much appreciated. There was some stuff in the training environment that I wish my data people had been able to see, but hopefully you'll do something with this specifically for Teams people.
Yeah, we've been talking, I've been talking with Elena and Veronica and Maria about doing more. We, at the beginning of this RFP, we said, hey, you need a performance accountability person. You need this quality assurance person. You need this data person. And we've done a lot with like the distance learning leads and the PD leads and the career navigators. And now it's time to beef up everything that we're doing with the local data folks. So I've kind of charged them with coming up with some good, crisp trainings about how to do the data dive in Teams. and just understanding how teams works and functions, like its brain, I think would be really beneficial.
It is, and within like this is my third year. Woohoo! We made it. We're in our third year out here in Crossroads, and so this is we're past the implementation dip, and this is our quality year. And because of that, I put together a quality team, and I have an amazing performance accountability lead. I have a quality assurance lead, and we have a new DL supervisor lead. And with that quality team, I really would like them in this, but it's really tough to help them specialize. Well, our performance accountability, that's all she does. Teams and I know you probably seen Felicia Clute on the calls and stuff, but so we really are taking this WII to heart, because it looks like case management is going deeper. Like, we're expanding our case management, and I'm also contemplating specializing with career navigation the way we did at the Workforce Center when I was a center manager. This particular case manager just handled choices, or this particular one just handled SNAP, or this one just handled the out-of-school youth, so that, they're doing from the very beginning, when we have those specialized targets and those targets that we have, that they're focused on, again, starting these conversations early and often about the importance of, you're with us beyond, no matter when you leave, we're still with you. And that relationship that you're starting with us, so that they're thinking about it the moment that they start our program. So
yeah, absolutely. It's a whole new world.
it is
one of the big things, like for our leadership, and kind of making sure that, we're messaging this correctly. It's like, case management wasn't really, it's very instructionally based. Like, there is, student services that are happening at the instructional level with instructors, but case management and sort of the realm that is in, man, that's a whole new ball game.
Well, and it became abundantly clear when TWC took over in 2014 that that's where we're going, especially with WIOA. WIOA was expanding. Yeah. We saw the writing on the wall. We knew it was coming. We're trying to wrap our mind around case noting and that sort of thing. And so this is good that we're taking a year to develop the structures and what that looks like. But it has become abundantly clear that we start these conversations early, building rapport, building it out in a quality way. So I hope you understand that, we've got our eye on quality, and, it makes it really tough. It spreads our people thin when we set up with the sort of numbers game. But it's all good. We'll get there. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to head out. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
I do have one question, Mahalia. I was a little late coming into the meeting. I was having some tech issues. But I wanted to ask, so does this pertain to all students coming into an AEL program, or is that just IET students? Because when you started talking about, entry, and then it started about training, and I was like, okay, but what if they didn't go to a training? And, so I was questioning, I had questions coming up in my head about all that. But in addition to that, is it just based off the program, like who they would, like, I guess the coordinator who wants to assign that duty to someone as far as follow-up, or is that like a career navigator or a data team thing, or who's responsible for that follow-up?
Yeah, this is, that's a local decision in terms of who's going to kind of get charged with doing these follow-up activities, or the tracking and that piece. That's totally up to local decision makers.
Okay.
But yes, it's every student. So and I don't say every student, every participant. So this is for every person that comes in. They take an assessment, an NRS approved assessment, and they get 12 hours. Okay. That puts them in the pot. And then we start counting on the data collection points for employment when they exit.
Okay.
So it's everybody.
But actual participants, right? So we want to look at the POP exeter with 12 hours plus. Okay.
Yeah. And there are a couple of exemptions. And if you want to learn more about, like, I have students that, they take a wrong turn, when I'm working with them and they end up going to jail. Or I have students that, come down with a medical issue and can't return to class because of that. There are some exceptions that you can exempt individuals from falling into these performance measures, because, why would you put someone in a performance measure for work if they're incarcerated?
Mhm.
If a person is having a medical issue and can't work, then, they shouldn't be in that performance measure. Now, there's a separate webinar on that, on exclusionary reasons, that I did, and I believe it's on the T-Call. And if you don't find it, you can always reach out to the ALTA box, and I'm happy to, share the link for that. But that's the only thing that's going to take them out of the running for the performance for
Okay.
employment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I know because we just came up with the process for the registration. I'm already thinking about ideas and how we can incorporate some of this stuff. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Mahalia.
Sure. All right. I'm going to jump off of here and on to the next meeting.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you, Mahalia.
Thank you.
It was really good. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Mahalia.
I'll see you guys. Hope everybody has a great weekend.
You
We'll
too.
see you
Thank you.
tomorrow.